Good evening and welcome back. Uh, I wanted to follow up my discussion of last night with a further uh, elaboration on a number of points uh, relating to the Israel-United Arab Emirates deal. But before I go into some of the key points that I want to highlight, I wanted to actually offer some guidance and maybe some direction to individuals. I have seen many people use all types of insult. I saw just a couple of quotes saying insulting Bedouins and using terminologies that really are inappropriate and counterproductive in general. I don't think this issue of the government of the United Arab Emirates uh, having reaching a deal and agreeing to open diplomatic relations and normalize relations with Israel, something that would be placed on the footstool uh, or the responsibility of Bedouins. I have, not to say that my best friend is a Bedouin, but I have engaged and worked and actually studied with Bedouin scholars that would not go for whatever the government of United Arab Emirates is undertaking. And it's actually would further damage the relationships that might exist between individuals and people in general. So my counsel and my instruction would be to really refrain from these types of responses. It's knee-jerk reactions. It's insulting a group of people rather than focusing the attention and critiquing the United Arab government, as well as the United States and Israeli government, and how they approach it. So for me, that's a very important way to delineate and make focus on those who are responsible and not to make this blanket accusations and blanket type of insult. So that's one. The second is also to make sure that a number of individuals and activists from the United Arab Emirates are themselves opposed to the actions that have been taken by their government and the emir and the crown prince and so on. And some in exile actually are more forceful in their critique, and also the internal restrictions that are imposed on individuals in the United Arab Emirates. And we saw uh, direct threats that are articulated against any individual that might uh, oppose or but even in social media, it's highly regulated and highly controlled uh, within the United Arab Emirates. So again, is also to make sure that at this point we want to encourage and work with and continue to bolster uh, individuals, citizens, as well as groups that are inside and outside United Arab Emirates that continue to express utmost support for the Palestinian cause. So those are just my initial refrains, just seeing the type of uh, comments and responses that people have. Now, the point that I want to focus on today, which I will delineate a little bit more, is this notion that certain Arab governments today are trying to craft a way to define what Islam is and what the Muslim society is all about, and the type of Islam that is to be practiced. But this is being constructed opposite what is termed to be a, a political Islam, or an Islam that is amenable to protest, or really is the whole notions of defining Islamism, and as such creating the scope that the current Arab despotic governments, the current monarchies, the current dictators who have been in seats of power for the longest period of time. These are mostly post-colonial states that have been formed as a result of colonial powers, giving the right to rule to tribes and elites, and they continue to be supported by their ex-colonial motherland, whether it is the UK, the French, and interestingly, the French coming to intervene in Lebanon as we speak, or the United States, or even if you take it to the Soviet Union during the Soviet era, but now Russia playing a role. So what we have is this notion that these monarchies and these states are representing what the notion of a Muslim society, the type of Islam that is to be practiced, and as such is to really frame it that this is a way or a battle to be forced to reclaim both Islam in the larger narrative, but also to claim the Middle East. But I would like to also speak to the notion that these monarchies, the dictators, and these regimes that have been in place for this long period of time uh, also crafted at an earlier period a type of Islam that was amenable to engaging in the Cold War. So Islam, again, the prophetic statement in relations to Islam, that people will follow the religion of their kings. But in here, the kings, the political elites are crafting a particular type of Islam and a particular notion that is self-affirming of their dictatorship, self-affirming of their despotic rule, self-affirming to their structures that really violates the basic tenets of human rights, basic tenets of freedom, basic tenets of the notions of citizenship. And as such, this contestation is being framed around also the question of Palestine. In here, as we see that in the past 5 days, Israel have been pounding Gaza, and the United Arab Emirates, as well as Saudi Arabia and its engagement with Gaza, been a deliberate, systematic effort to try to neutralize or dislodge Hamas from Gaza. And as such, we see that the United Arab Emirates have hosted Mohammed Dahlan as an advisor. And today you had a delegation from Egypt, which is governed by Sisi, who really owes his current seat of power in Egypt directly to Israel's support, first and foremost, as well as the financial, as well as the diplomatic support of Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, which provided the Sisi with the diplomatic cover in Europe, as well as the support here in the United States through the cooperation of AIPAC, of operatives, United Arab Emirates operatives, and Saudi Arabia's operatives in this sense. And what we see is this crystallization of this type of campaign focused on the supposed threat of the Brotherhood movement. And now in many of these governments and political elites in the Arab world, that every wrong in the region is being really channeled to the Brotherhood movement. And basically saying in so many different words that the threat of the Brotherhood movement in the Arab world and the Muslim world is so great that it is much better to support the dictators, the monarchies, because at least we know what we are dealing with, opposite possibly the support that might arise from the coming to power of activists and organizers of the Brotherhood movement. Now, in here, one has to be very clear that these are elites that have been nurtured and developed by the colonial and post-colonial powers. These were trained to see the world in the eyes and the lens of colonial, post-colonial powers, whether it's the UK, France, the United States, or broadly speaking about the Western world. This is not to be understood that it's a defense or an argument about the thoughts, the ideas, the programs of the Brotherhood movement. One can both critique the particular aspect and the particular ideas of the Brotherhood movement in the Arab world, and can take issue with a variety of elements in there. But to say that the Arab world and what it experiences today is directly connected to some type of a conspiracy or some type of an underground strategy, grand strategy of the Brotherhood movement really has to be taken to task. The reason that what we having today in the region is directly has to be placed at the footstool of all these political elites in the region. First and foremost, the monarchies, who continues to actually waste the resources of the region, continue to support every war under the sun, and have wasted and tormented generation after generation for no other reason than to secure their own seats of power at all costs. Now, a connection to this point that I have raised, which is very important. I also want to take the Arab world political left to task. And I know that those who prescribe to Islamic understanding and use Islam as an organizing framework also can be taken to task for not understanding and not relating to the Arab political left. But the Arab political left also internalized, I would say, a form of Islamophobic construction coming from a whole legacy that did not understand the centrality of Islamic ethos and Islam as a framework for individuals constituting both their community's engagement, political engagement, and cultural references. So the Arab left, I would say, wrongly have developed an antagonistic relationship, and I would say in certain instances Islamophobic approaches to relating and understanding how the political forces and organizational infrastructure within the Muslim communities operate. What translated is that this created the opportunity for both the political elites, the monarchies, the dictators, but also for external forces to use this gap between the Islamic-oriented political forces and grassroots organizers and the Arab political left and organizations, and pitted them against one another. And this crystallized, again, I would say, for anyone that had a clear understanding of the dynamics in Egypt. One aspect, there are many things that would be critiquing, but the actual split between the left, the Arab left in Egypt, and the Islamic forces, including the Muslim Brotherhood movement, and I would say also some of the Gulf states, in particular United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia, also instrumentalized the use of Islam or certain Islamic forces in order to create a Muslim-Muslim debate that also poisoned the will for the political engagement that are there. Now, I'm going through the whole discourse to understand that the dynamics of United Arab Emirates normalization of relations and open diplomatic relations with Israel has to be seen in light of this larger framework that is present in there. And part and parcel of this is the whole strategy or the whole attempt to formulate a new approach. I'm saying new approach, but an approach that would target both the Muslim forces in the region that can be looked upon in relations to Gaza, but also in other places in the region, as well as a possible construction of a confrontation with Iran that will result in a new war effort that will bring together the alignment of forces. And once again, we will see the resources, the population, generation, or possibly two, being put as a front pawn for a larger political game that at the end result, its victims will be the people and the societies of the region itself. And in this sense, Israel can get a new lease on life to continue to exist as the hegemon of the region while watching the confrontation taking place. On the one hand, the monarchies and the dictators who are using the Muslim figure as the boogeyman around which to rally both internal political forces as well as external support from the powers that be. And the second aspect is also to foment another cycle of Shia-Sunni confrontation between, again, the Sunni world that would be possibly represented in a cluster of coalition led by Israel as well as the Gulf states, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, opposite Iran and possibly Syria and others. The other elements in this, which today actually, or yesterday, Vice President, presidential candidate Biden, actually, I don't know for what reason, nobody knows, but whatever reason, he actually says that if he actually is elected as president, he will actually move to remove or to foment a regime change in Turkey, which is that he will move to remove Erdogan. So this for me comes directly possibly from his immediate circle of those who are beholden to Zionism in Israel, and seeing that the role that is being played by Turkey is counter to the formulation of strategy between Israel, United Arab Emirates, and Saudi Arabia. So that also raises the question of the other aspect of regime change, thinking of, on the one hand, Iran, but also on the other hand, in Turkey. And one can critique Turkey and critique its foreign policy as well as domestic policy. But in here, whenever you hear a presidential candidate or a president saying about a regime change of a country or a nation that has all the constitutive elements of a nation that has went through many layers of challenges and crises, including many military coups that were carried out, including the most recent coup took place in the country. So again, one raises the question of what is the strategy that is being laid out in front of us as it relates to how the region is being thought of and what are the forces for political change in there, knowing that the lines of demarcation that is being constructed around the top or the nature of Islam is being really played into this whole dynamic, which means that there is a good Muslim and there is a bad Muslim. And this reminds me of Hamadani's book, The Good and Bad Muslim, in relations to the framing. But the good Muslim is the one that accepts Israel, accepts its hegemony, opens diplomatic relations. If you tickle them, they laugh. If you if you hit them, they'll turn the other cheek. They're huggable, they're laughable. They most likely will appreciate all the finer things that the West offer them, and they will accept the political realities in the region, that you're born with a king in there and you'll die with the same king being in there. So that's, again, is the good Muslim. The bad Muslim is the one that continues to say Israel is a settler colonial state, supports BDS, that is actually say and wants to see the Arab and Muslim world independent, have self-determination of its own affairs, does not want to see its economy wasted, does not want to buy weapons of mass destruction to kill its own people many times over, does not think that the Shia-Sunni differences are the focal point of meaning and understanding in the Muslim world, while understanding that long history and that differences in the region is part of the strength rather than the weaknesses in there. So that's, again, is the framing of the different notions that are being placed, and Israel is positioning itself at the hub while simultaneously wanting to erase the Palestinians from the total picture. So why everybody is upset with the current step that the United Arab Emirates government have undertaken? Because it's being claimed that this is actually to help the Palestinians, that this will actually, Israel is agreed to suspend the annexation. And again, you could do whatever you want as a sovereign state, a sovereign post-colonial state, but at least have the basic dignity and basic respect, which is to say why you are undertaking this diplomatic relations. It is not for the Palestinians. We already see, if it was for the Palestinians, why would actually Israel over the past few days hammer Gaza with a bombardment almost on a daily basis? We understood that when United Arab Emirates wanted to send medical aid to the Palestinians without consulting with them, the Palestinians refused it, because at least we have the understanding that you should not undertake any initiative pertaining to us without at the least consult and ask the question whether this is actually something that is favorable. So the United Arab Emirates is an initiative that is really governed by United Arab Emirates' interest in relations, in developing relations with Israel, and it has nothing to do with the Palestinians. The second, and I think many individuals have pointed this, so I'm not saying this as my original ideas, there is a distinction to be made with the peace treaty with Egypt, even though I'm a very strong and persistent critic of the Camp David agreement and the subsequent agreements, as well as the agreement with Jordan, which is signed after the Palestinians signed. Both, one can say that Egypt fought a number of wars with Israel, at least 4 wars that Egypt, so they were in a state of war and reaching into a peace treaty. The end result of that Camp David is Israel withdrew from the Sinai desert, distorted as it may be restrictions on it, but as a response, it was based on land for peace, and Israel withdrew from the Sinai desert on the principle of the peace agreement that reached with Egypt. And the Israelis utilized it to free their hand in attacking Lebanon, and also to make the claim that they fulfill part of Resolution 242. Similarly, Jordan has been at the center of the conflict with Israel, whether it's in 48 or 67 or 1970, 69-70 conflict, and then tangentially in 1973. While understanding that the Jordanian monarchy had had long-standing, under-the-table, secret relationship with Israel, but one can set that as critique aside while saying that Jordan entered into a peace treaty with Israel based on trying to end the state of war that was between them. But the United Arab Emirates had no war, did not participate in a war with Israel, had not put any of its forces, nor have any territorial claims to make with Israel. So even to say that we have reached a peace deal, a peace of what, other than peace of the piece of United Arab sovereignty and subverting its sovereignty to Israeli interests in the region, with the hope that Israel will possibly assist and help United Arab Emirates in whichever future confrontation that might take place regionally with Iran, or also the current confrontation with Qatar, that both Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, and United Arab Emirates have a really completely sieged Qatar, and as such, whether Israel will play a role. And I think there is something to be said in this. And in here, I will also bring into the discussion the role that is being played by some of our American Jewish organization, in particular, AJC, the American Jewish Committee, the role that the ADL plays, the role of the Zionist Organization of America, because the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, even Qatar itself have welcomed leaders of these three organizations, as well as a number of other leaders from the American Jewish Committee, as to be the go-between in resolving the conflicts or the tension between the Gulf states. So not only that you have these major Zionist organizations in America tormenting the Palestinian, Arab, and Muslims in America, but also they have the audacity and they have the chutzpah to go actually into the Gulf region and to also be the go-between in there. Adding to this, also some of the most Islamophobic figures here from the United States, like the pernicious character and the Islamophobe par excellence, Daniel Pipes, having a welcome red carpet in United Arab Emirates. And what does he go to provide? He does training and workshops and takes individuals from here, the United States, to United Arab Emirates. And he actually does training on how to counter Islamism. And the same type of other individuals also have been invited to Egypt to do the same. So not only that we have to confront the Islamophobes in here in the United States, but some of the Arab governments, some of the monarchies, the United Arab Emirates, Egypt, and others are also brushing the credentials and providing the stage for these characters that really should not be even given the respectability of being welcomed in an airport, let alone being shown the red carpet, and to be the individuals to try to provide, quote, training in the Arab governments. As you say, you live long and you see, but we have lived long to see that some of our own governments and some of our own societies that are at such the lowest level of their existence, not actually understanding that these are the individuals that not only are Islamophobes toward Muslims, Arabs, Palestinians in America or in Europe, but actually come at the right circumstances, there actually will be Islamophobes toward your own societies as well, because they tend to actually create this Islamophobic imaginary that is there. So this is very critical to critique the role of these organizations, and my critique also for Arab, Muslim, and Palestinian organizations that continue to create this dialogue or this relations with some of these Zionist organizations. And I take Muslim and Arab organizations that think that this issue could be resolved by just sitting together and understanding each other in the vacuum. Our issue is not a communication issue or a lack of understanding of a text if we just get together and understand basic text. We are dealing with a settler colonial structure that has a logic to it, and this logic is consistent. There's nothing unique about settler colonialism. What the Palestinians are facing are features of settler colonialism that is almost identical and could be identifiable if you studied the indigenous population in America or indigenous population in New Zealand, in Australia, if you study the settler colonialism in South Africa, we'll actually come to clarity of what is it that we are dealing with, rather than what we see in here, at least my critique of Arab and Muslim organizations, especially in the United States, who think that integration and assimilation can be used as an avenue to formulate relations with the Zionists, because they assume, wrongly so, or assume maybe self-constructed assumption, that they are the gatekeepers and they will facilitate introducing them into circles of power and influence. And in here, this notion that somebody is going to bring you into circles of power and influence is a mistaken assumption, because it is based on giving up certain principles that you have. And the first and foremost is to give up on Palestine and don't bring Palestine with you to the table. So in that sense, is integration and assimilation on somebody else's condition, and no one is going to open the door to you unless you already have let go of the things that are unique and also significant to you in relations to what makes you you as a community, and in the long and very complex diversity of the Muslim community. So I've been very critical of these relationships that have been constructed with AJC or the program of the MLI, Muslim Leadership Initiative, which is Muslim leaders that are recruited by Shalom Hartman Institute, which takes them into a fully paid trip to visit and be in various parts of Palestine, and in essence to understand the importance of Israel to the Jewish Americans. And in here, let me be very clear in relations to Islamic law. Islamic law is very clear that you have no permission to visit an occupied land and paid for and brought to this visit by means of the occupying power. And don't even make the claim that your visit is to be in solidarity with the Palestinians. If you're in solidarity with the Palestinians, the first question to ask, what is the Palestinians' position on these visits and these trips that are organized by the Shalom Hartman Institute or AJC or ADL, and bring a Muslim participant in there? Palestinians across the board will tell you that this violates, and it's actually set against their self-determination. It actually prolongs their suffering and continues to empower the occupying power over them. So to be very clear on this issue. So that also gets into the modality of the good Muslim, bad Muslim. So just like the good Muslim, bad Muslim is being projected in the Arab world, the good Muslim and bad Muslim is being projected here in the United States. And there's some benefits to be had. I'm not going to be a person that says there's no benefit. There are some benefits to be had if you actually let go of your certain issues. But what we are calling for and what we're asking for individuals is to to have dignity, to have self-respect, to actually understand what it is to call for empowerment of yourself and your community. So these are for me, very critical issues to speak about. Now, speaking to this claim that this actually will benefit the Palestinians and that will suspend, or Israel accepted to suspend annexation. When Netanyahu called for or pushed for annexation, the global community and the activists across the world were able to actually challenge Netanyahu and push back. And in essence, it put Netanyahu in a very difficult position vis-a-vis the annexation. More importantly, Netanyahu wanted to use the annexation both for his electoral campaign, domestic Israeli politics, but also to shift the discussion away from his legal trouble and the cases against him in relations to corruption. So in this sense, the push for annexation was used in that way. The global community, the activists, both from across the spectrum, Palestinians, Arab, Muslims, liberal forces, Jewish activists in the US, in the UK, in Europe, and other places were actually very successful in mobilizing and creating the needed opposition that ended up that before even the United Arab Emirates and Israel's supposed agreement, it actually was stopped at its track. And what the United Arab Emirates have provided is almost a way out for Netanyahu to say that we're not going to go through the announced annexation, even though that annexation has been ongoing since 67, but that's a side issue right now, not the major theme, but in essence is giving Netanyahu an out with knowing that the world community is already moving in the direction of opposing Israel. Israel no longer have uncontested political power, both whether in Europe or in the United States, which gets me to the domestic transformation here in the United States as well. For many who are observing the Democratic Party primaries, AIPAC has lost its contestation of the squad, the 4 women that AIPAC has targeted. They targeted the 4 women. All the 4 women have won their primaries. The most possibly heavy mobilization was against Ilhan Omar in Minnesota, as well as Rashida Tlaib in Michigan. Both have won, even though that AIPAC has pumped so much money to try to unseat them. More critically is also in both in St. Louis and New York, 2 other candidates unseated, 2 long-standing AIPAC congressmen, congressmen and women, and as such also AIPAC lost. So in essence, you could say that the pro-Palestine, also pro-Black Lives Matter, pro-progressive agenda have won 6 battles, and AIPAC is at 0. So it's no longer possible for AIPAC to wave its power, to mobilize its financial resources and its democratic establishment to win the day. So we are seeing also shifts in here. Understanding that both Biden and Kamala Harris are committed to Israel and committed to Zionism. If you looked at the Democratic Convention schedule, it reeks with nod to Israel and continue to elevate Israel as the focal point of establishment Democrat. But let's be very clear. Establishment Democrats, as well as political leaders within the party, are the last to come into the bandwagon. The train have already departed. Zionism is already no longer have the day in terms of discourse. It's no longer can claim any way close to actually being within the category of liberal or progressive. The challenge of the organizers right now is how to push further from the grassroots into various elements of both the Democratic Party as well as the Republican Party, but that's a different animal altogether in terms of the engagement in there. So what we're seeing is both changes here domestically in the United States relative to AIPAC and relative to the mainstream established Zionist organization. And I think the wind of change are taking place in a very systematic way, and we're seeing some of those results in front of our eyes. So the positioning of Israel, United Arab Emirates, and being celebrated both by Trump as a success, as well as Biden and Kamala Harris, have to be understood in the larger narrative rather than only in the particular narrative as we speak today. So as in the immediate, I would say that the Palestinians have been given the short end of the stick by another Arab government that has pursued its very narrow interest at the expense of the Palestinians. But what we say is that their narrow interest will actually be to their detriment in the long run, because at the end of the day, Israel will only pursue its interest by magnifying divide and conquer in the region. And so far, the division and the conquering that is taking place from Israel is very much present and visible. Lastly, I would say the following, that the more that Israel integrates itself in all of the regional conflicts, whether it's in confrontation with Iran, whether it's in relations to Lebanon, Syria, whether it's in the conflict in Libya or in Yemen, or its engagement in Sudan, in southern Sudan, between South Sudan and Sudan, this brings Israel into a much more problematic construct, because it's not easy to maintain a framing where you actually are entangled in many fronts. In the short period, it might be sustainable with the big support of the United States and maybe also some European countries, in particular the UK at this point. But this is unsustainable, because the more that you actually entangle yourself with these regional conflicts, the more you become susceptible to the contradictions that exist in the regions. So in this sense, that Israel is brought closer to the contradictions and closer to the problematics that arises from it. And in this sense, I would say that what we need is to maintain and continue to do our deliberate work, continue to push for BDS, the boycott, divestment, and sanction. We need to continue to push to reorganize the Palestinian body politic, whether it's in the diaspora or inside. I think we need to bring a profound critique to the Palestinian Authority. It's time for it to actually bring to an end this experiment of being a subcontractor for Israel colonization. And what we need is to reconfigure our body politic. I am a person that calls for forming a government in exile, for us to reimagine and rethink what Palestine and Palestinians should be in relations to their political priorities. We need to recenter the right of return of the Palestinians. We need to recenter the rights of the refugees that are still in existence in a very precarious position, whether it's in Syria, in Lebanon, in Jordan, inside the occupied territories, in Gaza, where over 85% of the Palestinian population in Gaza is refugees. So what we need is to reimagine and rethink our political structure in order for us to get to the point where we actually can challenge what is taking place. So this is, for me, is a very, very critical and important. Last word, I promise, before maybe I'll take a look at some of the questions that you have on Facebook. I would definitely really encourage for the Palestinian left organization, the political left, broadly speaking, and also the organization that represents various elements of Islamic organizing, that what is needed is for us to resolve these issues that continue to be at the center. And what there need to be is a profound work to understand that what is needed is a transformation of our understanding and our political engagements. And it's no longer possible for us to have a zero-sum relationship. That this is, for me, is a foremost, because you cannot actually continue to build and change the political reality if we go into it in a way that we are divided in the same way that has it existed in the past. So I think it's high time for us to understand that the divisions that we continue to magnify are the divisions that are set and continue to actually put us in a very negative position. So I urge those who are, and I work with almost everyone in the political spectrum in the Palestinian forces, and I am as committed constantly to build and build on how to make change and how to bring transformation to Palestinian political empowerment and transformation for Palestinians to achieve their freedom, their dignity, and self-determination. So I'm going to take a look. If you have any questions on Facebook, I'll take a look at those. Carla says, is there any chance for Palestinian people? There's always a chance for Palestinians. So anyone that thinks Palestinians don't have a chance, I am very how to say it? I'm very optimistic that Palestinians are not going anywhere. That Palestine will be free and it will gain its freedom this sooner than later. The array of forces that have been placed against us have not been able to erase us. I always tell people the following: Palestinians have faced Zionism that was supported by the major superpower of the time, Great Britain, which is no longer great, alhamdulillah, then was inherited by the support of the United States, as well as support of the Soviet Union, which recognized Israel as well, and then also supported by various Arab elites in the region, including some of the Arab governments. And despite of all these array of forces, Palestinians still today exist. They are still resisting, and they still are making an impact globally. And I would just think of the type of work that the Palestinians have done in relations to US campuses and the type of success across the US campuses, the success of the Palestinian work with the anti-apartheid movement being one of the key components in the success of the anti-apartheid movement, and the work and the support of the African National Congress with Nelson Mandela, the support and the effective work that's done in relations to Latin American solidarity movement. So I am not at all taking the moment to cry and to say that the Palestinians of no chance. I am very optimistic that the success, the freedom, the liberation of Palestine is in the future. It's not a matter of if, but it's a matter of when, and whether we're going to witness it ourselves. That's the only question, because settler colonialism is unsustainable. Israel's contradiction is becoming wide and very clear to everyone. And Israel created its own litter box. That's what I say. It's a settler colonial litter box that Zionism and Israel have created for itself, and they can't shoot themselves out of it in whichever way they are. So if anything, they are really strategically are stuck. Even if you take the most right-wing Zionist in the West Bank or Israel, say transfer the Palestinians out, and I say, okay, let's get your Monday morning quarterbacking fascist idea. So where are you going to send 6 million plus Palestinians that are in historical Palestine right now? where you want to send them? You want to send them to Jordan. Jordan is about 70% Palestinians. You add 6.5 to 7 million Palestinians. So now you have the longest border of almost 450 or 480 miles border with Israel. It's you get into the mountains terrain. Do you think that Palestinians are going to go peacefully and sit in Jordan because you want to have your Eretz Israel, Great Israel, and celebrate that you have expelled and reenacted possibly the destruction that you read in the biblical text, and now you have actualized your what you call your dream speculative theological understanding and supported by the Christian Zionism, and all of a sudden you think you have achieved success. It's a momentary success at best because you have created a new borders and a new configuration of conflict. You want to send them to Lebanon, Lebanon will collapse, as well as the regional configurations will completely not be amenable. For those that are in the Knesset, they want to maintain a structure of apartheid. So we're going to have more settlements. We're going to put the Palestinians in cantons like what South Africa did in its black homelands. And we're just going to have our cake and eat it. We're just going to say we have Eretz Israel, but over there, these are the untouchable Palestinians. And we're going to continue to do whatever, meaning that you're going to defend an apartheid structure at a moment in history where the world no longer have the stomach nor the principle to actually support an apartheid structure. So the days of maintaining an Israeli apartheid are over. Even in the United States, the young Jewish activists are in the forefront of rejecting apartheid Israel as the definition of their identity, of their ethics, and of their future horizon. And the data from the Jewish organizations and the data from the major Zionist organizations show clearly that this transformation that is taking place in front of our eyes. So these are the options. Those who are calling for maybe a two-state solution is no longer viable, it's dead as a result. So this is, for me, while some might say it's a very problematic, I would actually say that the project, the Zionist project, as it's been conceived and imagined, is no longer sustainable at this particular time. The question from Abdul Rahman said, do you think Saudi Arabia will follow United Arab Emirates steps toward Israel, so-called peace? I think Saudi Arabia has already been having relations, diplomatic what you call de jure relations, de facto relations, opening various diplomatic channels, using also some of the major American Zionist organizations as the go-between. There are already a number of encounters between Saudi Arabia's representative and Israeli representatives. So that is the case in a meeting between major Zionist figures from the US and MBS. He actually in their report that he was far more forthcoming and actually basically dispensed with the Palestinians and wanting to have open relations. And some have argued that the United Arab Emirates balloon is to test the reaction that might come, and then we will see whether Saudi Arabia will follow suit. I think Saudi Arabia is committed to develop its relations with Israel because it sees Israel as the counterbalance in their view, the strategic confrontation with Iran. And also MBS feels that he needs to lean on some of the Zionist organizations and figures in the United States and in Europe to provide protection for him due to his wrong-headed and policies that have resulted in really his the killing of Khashoggi in the Saudi embassy in Turkey. And I would say that the CIA most likely had the evidence, have the communication intercepts, and knew exactly that it was a Saudi special forces. I want to know what's special about them if you actually send, it's actually worse than the Watergate plumbers to undertake operations. So I think there is this back channel that they would lean on some of the Zionist figures to try to assist in giving protection to MBS in this sense. So I do expect that Saudi Arabia, if it's not coming full diplomatic, is definitely would be following or tugging on the United Arab Emirates relations in this sense. I'm expecting Bahrain and Oman to be more quicker to the table in opening diplomatic relations, or at least elevating their relationship with Israel at the expense of the Palestinians. So all of this is to say that the picture in the Gulf shows for accelerated normalization taking place, all previewed or set against the Palestinians. So why does Hamas and the Palestinian left make a union? Well, again, the Palestinian left and the Hamas, they both right now are, in essence, at a outside the political game that is being played, and being played against their possible best interests, as well as possible long-term program for bringing about an end to the occupation, an end to the continued dispossession of the Palestinians. And the ongoing distance and the ongoing ideological tension that translates into dysfunctionality on the ground results in weakening both groups, and also utilizing their tensions and their division to drive the interest and the I would say the utilitarian policy formation, both from the regional actors as well as the global actors. And in this sense, this existing division begins to actually weaken the body politic of the Palestinians. And I think we have not learned from the past that our internal divisions is first and foremost is set against our own selves, and then secondary is used by our multiple oppositions, whether Israel or monarchies and dictatorships in the Arab world, in order to facilitate their own side deals on the back of the Palestinians. And I think what we need is to rise up to making sure that we are able to come up into a profound agreement on the overarching principles that govern the Palestinian interest and can push ourselves forward toward liberating our people. And I think often this has not been in the forefront, and these side issues have been to our detriment. And similarly, again, I would say I critique as much as the Muslim organizations and individuals who tend to also have almost a zero-sum approach and reductionist approach in thinking and dealing with organizing relative to Palestine. And I think those days of this type of framing has to be long gone. And I think both groups should have learned from the painful past that at this point they are its victims and continue to be projected as victims because they did not understand the game that continuously to be framed or being framed and organized around them. So if there's no other questions, I thank you for being with me. I covered, a whole bunch of issues that's on my mind. But I will end with, again, the refrain of individuals not to use insult or to use terminologies that will diminish the standing and the foundations of societies, especially our brothers and sisters in the United Arab Emirates, and not to use any type of insult on individuals. I think the citizens of the country, if we could use the term, these are subjects, because citizenship in the Arab world, with a few exceptions, is really non-existent. These are subjects of despots, subjects of monarchies, subjects of dictators, that you could actually be sent to jail and possibly lose your life for just putting a tweet opposing a policy or speaking of a policy, or even celebrating that your next door neighbor. There's individuals that are sitting in jail because they said Arabs should actually be in a peaceful relationship with one another. This is after the siege on Qatar. So again, we should not be used as instruments to driving these divisions, and not allow the governments and these despotic rulers, dictators, to formulate the relationship between people. What we need is to actually constantly call for freedom, for democratic engagement, for participatory politics, that at the core of every society is freedom. And again, we could go back to the statement of Umar ibn Khattab, the second caliph, who said, متى استعبدتم الناس وقد خلقتهم أمهاتهم أحرارا? When have you been given the right to enslave people and their own mother gave birth to them in a state of freedom? So what we call is for a state of freedom for all our Arabs brothers and sisters. I sometimes say that Palestinians, we are actually under occupation, and we know exactly what we're dealing with. It's an occupation, but across many of the Arab worlds, their occupation is actually by their own governments, and their own governments have stripped them of the basic ability to be free, to have dignity, to have freedom, to have justice, to have self-determination, and the ability just to have basic food and to be able to actually take care of your family. And that is, again, a calamity that we need to speak of it. And I do work on immigration and refugees, and just to think of the so many Arabs and Muslims and Africans that die daily in the Mediterranean for no other reason than escaping their own conditions in their own societies that are a result of the post-colonial era that continues to really wreak havoc on a daily basis. So again, I'm aware and cognizant of this, and that's why I don't like people to use the major knife that is being directed at us by Arab governments to turn on our Arab brothers and sisters in their own societies and countries, unless the person is actually vocally, like there's a number of these what you call propped up figures in the Gulf that are used to tweet and so on, celebrating their relationship with Israel. If that's the type of person, then basically direct your critique and your answer to that person, but not to actually make it possible for this to actually be the framing of what is taking place. So that's my last refrain, and encourage you to maintain. We are in a long-term struggle, and every step forward, we have to make it collectively. And our freedom is a collective effort. And I do feel that it is something that will come by. And inshallah, we all will be in Jerusalem together, celebrating and inviting all the Arab Muslim people from across the world to celebrate in Jerusalem, as well as all of our brothers and sisters from across the Arab and Muslim world. Also, all of our allies, including our Jewish allies, to welcome them to be with us again, to celebrate collectively in a free Jerusalem and a free Palestine, inshallah. Okay, assalamu alaikum.